Yes.
Hello and good evening. I welcome you all to the Socio-Legal Literary Interview Series. We are joined by Professor Arvind Kumar, and today we are going to discuss about his chapter in this book. This book came from Samudhar Foundation, Penguin Publisher, a book called Rethinking India series, The Sudra's Vision for a New Path. So we would invite our colleague Tasneem Fatima to introduce Professor Kumar. Tasneem.
Hello and good evening, everybody. Professor Arvind Kumar is an assistant professor at the Center for Study of Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policy, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. He obtained a master's in politics and subsequently an MPhil and PhD from American Studies Division, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has been an independent fellow at Sarai Center for the Studies of Developing Societies, Delhi, and a recipient of the Independent Doctoral Fellowship and Fellowship for Data Collection from abroad under the aegis of Indian Social Council of Social Science Research. His research interests include comparative politics, history, and politics of discrimination and inclusion, and anti-caste and anti-race movements. His academic writings and reviews have appeared in South Asian History and Culture, South Asia, Journal of South Asian Studies, India Quarterly, Mainstream Weekly, Economic and Political Weekly. He is a bilingual author and a political commentator who also participates as a panelist on major national television news channels. I request Rajesh to begin the interview and ask the first question.
Let me begin with the first question. How do you see the place of Sudra in modern Indian nation? You wonderfully drawn the reference of idea of nation from the historians Romila Thapar, scholar Gopal Guru, and Benedict Anderson. Do you think that India as a nation is not inclusive since inception from the fact that Indian national movement itself, as many scholars have pointed out, is dominated by the upper caste people?
Yes.
Thank you.
So at the onset, let me congratulate Social Legal Literary platform. And I'm very excited to share my thoughts with this newly come up organization. And I'm doubly delighted for the fact that the founders of this team, Social Legal Literary, is a bunch of very young, bright, and energetic students. Well, this is a very complex question, Rajesh, and but let me try to sort of, as you explain, this is a book which is an edited book, so it has chapters from renowned scholars across the country, and I'm thankful to the editor that they have given me the chance that I could write the lead essay. While I was thinking the moment when you asked question about nationalism and the Sudra question, I will leave the complex question of nationalism for time being, because it would be very difficult in a conversation like this to answer on all the aspects. But recently I was reading Christopher Jefferlow, who is one of the most extensively prolific writer on contemporary Indian history and politics. I was referring to one of his essay that reads For a Theory of Nationalism. And there he quotes a renowned scholar called Craig Calhoun, and he says, nationalism is too diverse to allow a single theory to explain. So, as I promised at the onset, I shall not get into the whole question of nationalism. Yet, why I chose Anderson's whole understanding of what is a nation and what constitutes nationalism for a simple reason that we are largely, in modern sense, Indian nation, we are an imagined community. Because like majority of our social science concepts have been borrowed from Europe, this notion is also Eurocentric. So I shall leave this question of nationalism here. But then comes the question of, as you rightly pointed out, how national movement has been monopolized by upper caste. It's not that, others were not involved, and a lot of people were involved. To an extent, a Marxist historian called Sumit Sarkar brought in the question of peasants, farmers, women, tribals. Later, subaltern studies attempted. But, I feel that they too have miserably failed in reclaiming all those who constituted the nation and all those who participated in the national movement. And recently there is a book which is published from Navayana. The title of the book is Riddles in Hinduism. Basically, it's a collection from Dr. Ambedkar's collected works. But this has a fascinating essay towards the end. It has a critical annotated introduction by Kancha Ilaiah, the same editor. But what I am fascinated with is the last essay, which is titled as The Towel, the Tar Brush, and the Hammer. It is written by U. Syamasundar. He's a cartoonist and he has done a fascinating book on relating to cartoon. You all remember the NCERT Ambedkar cartoon controversy. Now, let me read a paragraph from this book. It reads, Ambedkar explains why we need not to be surprised. It is the context, larger context of the national movement. In 1918, this is borrowed from Ambedkar's writing. In 1918, when the non-Brahmin and the backward classes had started an agitation for separate representation in the legislature, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, at a public meeting held in Solapur, said that he did not understand why the oil pressers, tobacco shopkeepers, washermen, etc., that was his description of non-Brahmins and backward classes, should not want to go in the legislature. Now, Ambedkar explains this further. He says, in his opinion, that is in Bal Gangadhar Tilak's opinion, their business was to obey the laws and not to aspire for power to make laws. One of the tallest leader of the national movement, Bal Gangadhar Tilak. I can go on and on several such leaders, but we have to save time for this conversation, and I would want to come to the question that you have asked. Another scholar that you rightly pointed out that since the inception of nation, now it's a difficult question. When do we consider the timeline that when we emerged as a nation? But in all probability, we can converge to an idea that with adoption of constitution or with the freedom, independence that we got on 15th August 1947, or more specifically 26th January 1950, since when we started working as per our constitution as a modern constitutional democracy. At this stage, again, it would be difficult to say that whether we are an inclusive nation or not. I would rather say that we are an inclusive nation in the making. So each moment there are agitations and so they are always 2 steps forward and 1 step backward and so on and so forth. But what I believe that even today, after say 75th years of our independence, we actually cannot claim ourselves to be an inclusive nation. Now I come to the realm of social science, and therefore Gopal Guru has been one of the favorite scholars. I read, he wrote this essay called How Egalitarian is Social Sciences in India in 2002 Economic and Political Weekly. It's not a coincidence that these days he's the editor of this journal called Economic and Political Weekly. Now, in this essay, there was a debate about how egalitarian social science is, and if it is not, why it is not. So there are different scholars putting in their viewpoints. And in the context, one of the scholars called Ram Guha says he underscores the absence of liberals in the social science. On the other hand, Partha Chatterjee underlines colonization of social sciences by certain metropolitan centers in the country. Now, here comes the context. Gopal Guru, in the very abstract of this essay, writes, Indian social science represents a pernicious divide between theoretical Brahmins and empirical Sudras, which simply means that the whole process of theorization, or if doing theory supposedly is a superior task. So a majority of the tasks which the Sudras in any case performs in their everydayness to make this nation, from the potter to the several communities Bal Gangadhar Tilak mentioned, except for those, anyone. And let me bring in nation, the whole symbols of nation for or nationalism for that matter, like national flag. Who teaches the national? Whether it is a Hindu or a Muslim, it's definitely a community called Darji. If he is a Hindu Darji, he will be called Darji. If he is a Muslim Darji, he will be called Idursi. So, so and so forth. What I'm trying to, bring in, a point from Gopal Guru, that it was some 20 years back that he wrote that Indian social science is divided between two group of performers. The superior performance was doing theory, and the Sudras meant for, he definitely uses is at an analogy. But the point is, to my surprise and to the entire team of this author, realized that we definitely have a book like, say, Sudras in Ancient India by R.S. Sharma, much later after independence. But on the eve of independence, Dr. Ambedkar himself wrote a book called Who Were the Sudras? So, but entire 70s, 80s, 90s, when the word Dalit became very popular in academia and media, we did not have a word called Sudra. So I do not know whether it was a deliberate exclusion, but it is from this background that this whole category of Sudra was chosen. Now, any movement like the entire Mandal movement, and even before that, what the scholars like Mark Galanter and Christopher Jefferle captured in their writings, used this administrative category called other backward classes more so, rather than the Sudras. So it is in this context, it was pertinent to ask this pertinent question, this important question, that where are the Sudras? Now, how do we link the Sudras with the nation? I'm reminded of, one of my favorite poet called Sarveshwar Dayal Saxena. He has a poem, the title of the poem, it's in Hindi, which reads, Desh kagaj par bana naksha nahi hota. It's a long poem, but just to situate the question that where are the Sudras, who are the Sudras, and does they constitute the nation? And if they constitute the nation, why would not they claim their sort of, role into making of this nation? And, this, I'm just reading the second paragraph of this poem, will give you a context to this. This reads, देश कागज पर बना नक्शा नहीं होता कि एक हिस्से के फट जाने पर बाकी हिस्से उसी तरह साबुत बने रहें, और नदियां, पर्वत, शहर, गांव वैसे ही अपनी अपनी जगह दिखें, अनमने रहें। यदि तुम नहीं मानते तो मुझे तुम्हारे साथ नहीं रहना है. Now you see, with this paragraph from this poem, I only intend to say that in terms of democracy and the whole question of nation, you have terms like, say, plebiscite. You have terms like self-determination. You have terms like, you have a concept like
a referendum. Now we talk about Kashmiri nationalism. We talk about Naga nationalism. So do we, while talking about Kashmiri nationalism or Naga nationalism, do we undermine Indian nationalism? Absolutely not. So the whole question of nation and nationalism is very complex. Therefore, you have a book by a very famous scholar called G. Aloysius. He taught at Jamia Millia for quite some time. He also is a JNU PhD. His book is Nationalism Without a Nation in India. Now you see, you can have nationalism even without having a nation. So it's social science is all about questioning the what is rigid and rethinking, reimagining, because what we have as a nation and national is only imagined community, as Rajesh correctly referred, when I refer to Benedict Anderson in my essay. And to come to the question of Sudras now, because this is the trajectory that I have taken. I have explained nation and nationalism first, and I have also in a footnote written why nation and its Sudras. That I have questioned the whole scholarship of Partha Chatterjee, and then I established something called the nation and its Sudras in a broader context of the book, which is written as the Sudras Vision for New Path. Now, while I explained a bit of Naga nationalism or say Kashmiri nationalism, or how you can have many nations without one great nation. So, and this European import of the question of nationalism. Let me go to another very layman example. Many a times, because Maharashtra has been my field work also, because I studied the Dalit Panthers during my PhD. When I went to Maharashtra, people greet each other saying Jai Hind, Jai Maharashtra. Now, what does Jai Hind and Jai Maharashtra mean? It only means hail India as a nation and hail Maharashtra as a nation. So this Marathi nationalism also comes from that Maratha nationalism of Shivaji Maharaj. Why? Because then there was a Mughal Samrajya, as in the Mughal Empire, which was being questioned by Maratha nationalism, under the leadership of Shivaji Maharaj. So that's how Jai Hind, Jai Maharashtra. Now let me narrate another interesting story. And here I will conclude the first question. Recently, in fact, last year, during the pandemic only, I was invited as a speaker to one of the national convention of BAMSAFE. BAMSAFE is a very important organization founded by Kansi Ram and D.B. Khoparde, other intellectuals of the time. In that convention, while addressing the audience, in my JNU Jamia training, I used the term called Hindustan for India, which is quite popular, which is quite common. But then the organizers stopped me, as in after I finished my speech, they said, "Sir, please don't call Hindustan." I said, by Hindustan, I definitely did not mean Hindustan, as in, the nation of the Hindus. Because Romila Thapar, as Rajesh correctly said, Romila Thapar has beautifully explored this question of why Hindustan is called with Hindu, and that Hindu is definitely not Hindu as a religion, but river Sindhu. And, I'm sure, we all are aware of that debate. I'm not getting into that. But what is very interesting is that the BAMSAFE addressed Mahatma Phule as Rashtrapita Mahatma Phule. Me coming from a bordering district of Bihar and Jharkhand, for me, Mahatma Gandhi is the only father of nation, to my imagination. But it was an addition to my mind that Mahatma Phule lived much before Mahatma Gandhi. And then they addressed him as Rashtrapita Mahatma Phule, and then they addressed Dr. Ambedkar as Rashtra Nirmata Dr. Ambedkar. Now you see, By this example, I am only meaning to say that nation can also have two fathers of nation for that matter, both Mahatma Phule and Mahatma Gandhi. All I'm trying to suggest that these organizers stopped me, as in rather suggested me to use Bharat and not Hindustan, only to suggest that they said we are a constitutional democracy. And in constitution, the only word written is either India or Bharat. In fact, if you read constitution, it reads, India, that is Bharat. Now you see, if I say Bharat and if somebody else says Hindustan, or the way rather I said Hindustan, somebody can have problem. But he always can suggest his imagination of a nation. And as I said, those symbols of nation are very integral to the nation and nationhood. And as I said, the national flag, which is the most integral symbol. Let me take another symbol, like say Rashtrapati Bhavan. We have a Mughal garden attached to Rashtrapati Bhavan, which is a national pride. Now tell me, who are the Malis there? Who makes the Mughal garden so beautiful? Is the Sudras? Is the Malis? Do they get their due in the nation, in the nation that we are so proud of? Who makes a Swachha Bharat? It is the Ati Sudras of this nation. You take, for instance, even Jamia Millia Islamia, where I teach. You go to sanitation department. Who are those communities who are cleaning Jamia Millia Islamia to make it #1 university in this country? It is the Ati Sudras. So these Sudras, these Ati Sudras are, have a due in the nation, which must be reclaimed. It is this essay in this book is an humble attempt to provide an agency to those voices. This is what I wanted to say in response to what Rajesh asked.
Thank you so much, Professor. I would now like to continue with the second question. The second question goes to the identity of the Shudras. Who are the Shudras? In your essay, you talk that modern day Shudras are not exactly the same community as they were in ancient times, and they are no more governed by ancient Dharma Shastras. So this class are still producer class. So what are the underlying reasons, according to you, for this producer-consumer disparity?
Interesting question, Tasneem. Well, when I say this in my essay, that they are not exactly the same community, because you see, in terms of looking this nation from the lens of a caste, we realize that different identities related to caste and community, whether it's jati or varna, it has taken different shape at different historical epochs. And we have a long history. So what I mean that in Indo-Aryan society, we had 4 varnas. And you see, this book is also an attempt to sort of demolish some of the hegemony which has been created. Because you see, I'm pained at one thing. Let me tell you very frankly, that we often say God has made all equal. I'm sorry, I'm an agnostic person. If I would not call myself an atheist, maybe I turn atheist someday. But Hindu society is created unequal by God. Why? Because we are told that it is Brahma who arms the Kshatriya, from his thighs, the Sudras, and from his thighs, the Vaishyas, and from his feet, the Sudras. Now, how can God create us unequal? And therefore, the editor of this book, Professor Elia, has written a fascinating book, that's his PhD, called God is a God. But because he was so pained with the Brahmanism, he thought of an egalitarian religion called Buddhism. And therefore, he let lower castes also enter into what we understand as the Buddhist Sangha. He also gave entry to women. When I say so, that the communities are not exactly the same, Of course, I mean that there has been metamorphosis. There has been some transformation over a period of time. But let me reiterate the fact that the Sudras and Ati-Sudras, as in today's scheduled castes and OBCs, are yesterday's Sudra only. So there's a shared history of Sudras and Ati-Sudras also. So that must be explored into. I have my ongoing researches towards that. So that will someday establish that till Indo-Aryan society, we did not have fifth Varna. So even Dr. Ambedkar says that Sudras were the lowest of the ladder before the fifth category was produced towards Gupta period. And, there are different debates, there are different scholars, informing us when did we have started untouchability and how a category of people from Sudras itself became Ati-Sudras. And that is, the Sudras and Ati-Sudras are the terms which Mahatma Phule uses in the 19th century. So I think for me, there has been a shared history. If you go to Dalit Wada, or let me take a reference of an autobiography by a very famous professor called Tulsi Ram. His book is Murdahiya. If anybody reads Murdahiya, will realize that the hamlet of Sudras and Ati-Sudras are so close to each other. So they share culture, they share food, they share non-vegetarianism, and lot of damage has been done to these communities by theories like Sanskritization or theories like dominant caste. It does not have any emancipatory potential. So all I was saying that when we talk about the politics of recognition of an identity, the first and foremost point is about owning that identity. Like the Adivasis are owning that, yes, we are Adivasi. Yes, we are Vanvasi. Yes, we are, for the Jal, Jameen and Jungle. It is we who nurture the plants and trees. It is we who save our hills. So in a similar fashion, the Sudra category have never owned their own sort of identity. It is perhaps that we have this problem. So I see that for Sudras it is a foremost duty to own that identity, and then only that agency will come that they fight for their own rights in reclaiming their share in the nation.
Thank you, Professor Kumar. Now I'm referring the page number 10 of your essay, and you read the question of casteist seller to the Bahujan politician. And I would like to connect this dot with the some current event that has happened recently. Ranveer Hooda and several other people were criticized. In fact, some of the leading feminism organization has been criticized also for the remark on former Chief Minister and BSP Supremo Mayawati ji. Your essay reveals that how casteist slurs made against the veteran socialist leader Sharad Yadav and Karpuri Thakur as well. How do you see this hypocrisy? I would be very frankly to call it hypocrisy. And the second part of my question is that how do you see the role of language in creating intellectualism among the Bahujans?
Okay. Now, before I take up this question, last part of what Tasneem asked, I missed that this comes to my mind. She also asked about producer-consumer paradigm, parity. To that, I would like to respond because farmers' movement is already on. You see, it's going on, and today nobody cares. You all understand when I say nobody cares, which means at least the government of the day does not care. You see, when we, from the beginning of this program, we have been talking about the nation. Now, if I ask again a layman's question, who feeds this nation? If the way I said, it is not, nation is not about a map drawn on a piece of paper. So if we have a nation, and if we have a 130, 140, whatever you may apply, the population, and even if it is a free food or under the pandemic situation, where does that food come from?
From the producers, farmers.
We produce it? Do we don't know exactly? Do we produce it in the machine? Do we produce it in the factory? No, we are producing it. The farmers of this nation are producing this from the mud, which is considered impure. This work culture, and Professor Elia has elaborated this, that this nation considers production as impure. The women's menstruation in this nation is considered impure. Therefore, you have Sabrimala debate in this country. Now you see, when a woman, when mother menstruates, then only mother is fertile, then only she produces a child. So this nation, whosoever, I am an Indian, my mother produced me because my mother was Indian. So I am an Indian because my mother was impure for a week's time. So those who produce from the impure mud, it is that what we eat and we survive. And this is how the nation survives. Now we are so insensitive to the producers of this nation. And therefore, I'm saying the producers is not just restricted to farmers. Now tell me, you have a survey. I bet you have a survey. What is the percentage, caste-wise percentage of the farmers? You will realize that a majority of the farmers are Sudras, a majority of the non-land owning communities working as free laborers in those fields are none but the SCs, the scheduled castes, whom we consider as Ati Sudras. So it is in that sense, while I gave example of a Darji stitching the national flag, to producing food, what we eat, everything, the producers of the nation are the Sudras and Ati Sudras. I'm writing, I'm not producing. I'm doing an intellectual questioning. And this relates to your question now, Rajesh, that of course there's a hypocrisy. So I would not let them go scot-free. So even the socialist leaders, what could they have done to the Sudras? Have not done, have not done justice. They have not done. They have not brought in enough emancipation to them. They have not brought in enough consciousness, I would rather say. Like Christopher Jefferley says that India had silent revolution. Definitely. Now, by silent revolution, he only meant that the representation in the parliament and the assemblies increased. Fair enough. But what did they do? They did nothing, as what, Kansi Ram's first book, Chamcha Age. In Chamcha Age, he categorically wrote that the leaders of the communities are the chamchas. Now, recently, after the cabinet expansion, there was a lot of debate. We have so many OBC, ministers taking up. Why nobody asked how many OBC women? Now, nobody is asking. For long years, women reservation bill is pending in the parliament, only suggesting that now I'm talking about the hypocrisy. These leaders, these OBC leaders kept on saying that why can't we have reservation quota within quota? So if we have a women reservation, let us have, quota within quota, as in the women of the OBCs, as in the Sudra women, the women of the SC, as in the Dalit women, the women of the Muslim, the women of the Christian, the women of the Adivasi. Fair enough. Those who blocked women reservation bill, so-called blocked, that it couldn't be passed. It was passed in the Rajya Sabha. And we have leaders from, three spectrums, entirely, different spectrums. I still remember that photograph. Brinda Karat, Sushma Swaraj, and Sonia Gandhi. All three of them hugging each other, playing with Gulal, that we have won. Now you see that for long years, because this is factually true also, that we did not have one party dominance in the parliament for last 20-30 years, 25-30 years. No single party had a majority. Now for last 7 years, we have a party which has a majority in the Lok Sabha. Why women reservation bill is not being tabled? Now I am not questioning whether quota, within quota or without. Why? Because there is a problem. The problem is the intersectionality of caste and gender. You are aware of this fact that question of representation is blocked by bringing in the genderness. We are not ready as a nation to provide enough representation to women. And giving the underrepresented, while I say 60-70% of the Indian population is SC, ST, OBC, I mean that 50% of those 60% is obviously women. Now who else? So you start giving reservation to women, naturally that, as I said, the intersectionality of caste and gender will come. So women from the marginalized section will start getting represented. And I think it does damage too, but it can come up as an emancipatory project. Like Dalits took it head on. Since I have worked for my PhD on Dalit Panthers, there is a very famous poet. There was, in fact, he's no more. Baburao Bagul. Baburao Bagul had a very fascinating short story in Marathi, which was translated in Hindi as "Jab maine jaat chupai." So now tell me, why does one have to hide his or her caste? So if the reservation question comes, people will say, nahi, jatiwad badh jayega. It will bring in casteism. Why? Because the reservation is caste-based. Now, if the disease is caste-based, the diagnosis has to be caste-based, because unless you have understood the disease, how would you diagnose it? So now, after you have 10% reservation, without any data, without any commission, now you would not have such debates on television channel whether caste-based reservation is good or bad. That chapter of reservation is closed now. Why so? Because the moment you raise it, that we cannot have caste-based reservation, that 10% quota for the EWS. Now, let us understand. This EWS is not EWS for anyone. Muslim child studying in Jamia cannot apply for EWS quota. EWS quota is meant for 10% population of the general category. Now, who is the general category? The Dvijas of this case. Nobody questions now whether we have 10% of the Dvija population in this country or not. But everybody from Arun Sori to M.N. Srinivas had questioned, how do we arrive at 52% by 1931 census? Is it still relevant? Of course, because if 1931 census, the scheduled caste population was 14 to 15%, even today they are close to 16%. They're not 60%, neither they are 6%. If by 1931 census, the scheduled tribe population is close to 7.58%, they are 8 point something. They are not 18%, nor they are 2%. So it is close to that. Similarly, if the 1931 census suggested that the Sudra OBC population of this country is close to 52%, it cannot be 27%. But how did we arrive at? The Supreme Court, Honorable Supreme Court made an intervention that we shall have a ceiling of 50%. We cannot cross that. Indira Sahni judgment, the famous 9 benches judgment. Though some judges opposed it, some judges gave a dissent, but thankfully it was passed in the name of social justice, Hail Supreme Court. Now tell me, the same Supreme Court which recently turned down the Maratha reservation question, citing the reason that the reservation cannot exceed 50%, how does the same Supreme Court has not stayed the 10% reservation? Can anybody give me a clue to this? So it is from this perspective, Rajesh, that we have a casteist nation. It is from this perspective, somebody just tweeted to the new minister, Kiran Rijiju. Out of the 31 judges in the Supreme Court, including the CJI, Chief Justice of India, 2 are OBC and 1 is SC, 1 is Muslim, 1 is Christian. Do we think if such is the unity in diversity, hail nation? I would always say, like, Jai Hind, but as I said, like, the different, sections of this society who are, working hard, to feed this nation, who are working hard to feed themselves. Because if Indian dies, in India, Mother Bharat Mata, must feel, sad about. किसी भी माँ का बच्चा मरता है, तो माँ को तो बुरा लगेगा. So considering that, what I'm meaning to say that those children of Bharat Mata, I'm very in a very paradoxical sense, I'm using this term called Bharat Mata. Those who are interested can go through a new book which Purushottam Agarwal has written, Bharat Mata Kaun Hai. It's in Hindi. Must go through. In order to have a glimpse of what Bharat Mata actually means. But I would end this, answer by saying that the marginalized sections of this society, the Sudras, the Atisudras, the Adivasis, the women, the Muslims, the Christian, they all have a share in the making of nation. So they all must reclaim their due also.
Thank you, Professor Kumar, to talking about this. And I would like to refer Professor Kumar's articles at page number 6. And I flagged this with green, that whether Professor Kumar is talking about the caste census, the importance of data, because we have not any data on the SC/ST and OBCs class. And Professor Kumar talks about the Ambedkar's writing about the caste census and Sudra problem in 1946. So this is one of the crucial issues that Professor Kumar has brought from the question number 3 that I asked. And I would like to flag this with green. I have flagged this while I was writing, and this is at page number 6. So before Tasneem would ask the 4th question, this is one of the important things that I'd like to bring the notice of the viewers at page number 6. This is an important content that Professor Kumar talked about, because we all know how data is relevant. And when you, and Professor Vicky Jackson has a fantastic research when she talks about the aspect of research in the academia, and the aspect that how the representation itself comes from the data of the community that you have. So Tasneem, over to you from the next question on reservation.
Yes, Rajesh, look, this is the book which Dr. Ambedkar had written. It was just on the eve of India's independence. In 1947, we got independence. This is a book which Dr. Ambedkar wrote in 1946. Who were the Sudras? And the second part, as in colon, the caption is very interesting. He says how they came to be 4th Varna in the Indo-Aryan society. So now he has a debate and he has a different take on Kshatriya, Neo-Kshatriya status. I do not buy this argument from Dr. Ambedkar. I have a lot of respect for him, but this is academics that many a times we disagree. So on that question, I disagree with Dr. Ambedkar. But what I agree with him is a quotation that I have quoted in my book, and I would like to read because you so sincerely and diligently have also earmarked that. I think it needs to go to the audience. And I read, Dr. Ambedkar wrote, under the system of Chatur Varna, Sudra is not only placed at the bottom of the gradation, but he is subjected to innumerable ignominies and disabilities so as to prevent him from rising above the condition fixed for him by law. Now, which law? I will just explain after reading this out. Indeed, until fifth Varna of untouchables came into being, the Sudras were, in the eyes of the Hindus, the lowest of the low. This shows the nature of what might be called the problem of the Sudras. If people have no idea of the magnitude of the problem, it is because they have not cared to know what the population of Sudras is. Unfortunately, the census does not show the population separately. Now, he is writing in 1946, therefore he is saying so. Why? Because caste census stopped in 1931. Then he says, but there is no doubt that excluding the untouchables, the Sudras form about 75 to 80% of the Hindus. A treatise which deals with no vast population cannot be considered to be dealing with trivial problem. Now you see, Dr. Ambedkar was facing this problem from lot of different sections. So many, I was reading R.S. Sharma, and then he says this book nobody has written, and this is a book by a politician. So R.S. Sharma, definitely, again, I have a lot of respect for him. He's also no more. His son taught at Jamia. So R.S. Sharma is a very well-known historian. But then he addresses Ambedkar as being a politician. So he doesn't consider him to be an expert writing on Sudras. But as a politician also, as a representative, who was also a representative in the constitution making, he had some sense of the society, you see. So therefore, when he's saying this, that this is the population, and the law, as I was referring to that, I'll come a little later, the law he is meaning is of the Manusmriti. Because even after the Britishers had come, they made Gentoo's law. And Gentoo's law was what? Nothing but, an amalgamation of different sections and different ignominities and disabilities that Dr. Ambedkar talks about, was quite relevant. So an average Sudra's life was like today, we are all, as we say, are governed by Indian Constitution. There's no doubt about it. But despite that, we do get instances of a woman rape. And if there is a Dalit woman, there are more chances of being raped. If there is a Northeast girl, with their, with a comment on their attire, there are more chances of them getting raped. I'm just trying to give you the hard realities of, the nation, its national capital. So in that sense, Dr. Ambedkar says that why can't we have the population of the Sudras counted? These days we have NSSO data, so, roughly you can calculate. But definitely the caste census, 2011, it was all said that we'll have caste census. It was not done. Now we already have a G. Rohini commission. Very recently, I think 2 or 3 days back, they got another extension till January 2022, I suppose. They are trying to reorganize or recategorize the OBC, the OBCs across the nation. And fair enough that because of the pandemic, they must get, extension. But my question is, why aren't we counting the OBCs? Why aren't we counting the Sudras? Therefore, what I feel that what counts the most today for the Indian nation is counting the Sudras. Because you see, the Ati Sudras and the Adivasis are still being counted. The SC and the STs of the nation are being counted. The Dvijas of this nation, without being counted, consider that they are close to 10%. Therefore, we have a 10% reservation for them. Now let us see the 10% amongst those who are economically weaker. But the population is 10%. That's very interesting, which means 50% reservation was already reserved for the Dvijas. Now we have another 10%. So basically close to 60%, because there are very less chances that an OBC and SC and ST competes in the general category. Why so? And therefore, like, this Anand Teltumde's book is very interesting. The title of the book is very interesting, called Republic of Caste. So we are definitely a republic, but we are a republic of a caste. Why so? Because tomorrow you study in Jamia, you study in Delhi University, you study in JNU, and after you have earned your PhD, if you have passed the NET examination, and then you start appearing in the interviews, in the roster that you fall into a category, you will be made to appear in an interview with the people of the same category. So you are already categorized. And that's what Mandal Commission says. Considering unequals as equals is greater sin. You cannot treat unequals as equals. When we talk about equality of opportunity, you give a Sudra candidate, a Ati Sudra candidate to compete with a Dvija candidate without letting the nation know that one belongs to which category. And most often you will see that in the categories of Sudras, in the category of Ati Sudras, you have a term called none found suitable. Now, earning the same degrees from the same universities, they were suitable to get into that university. They were suitable to get educated in the same university, to earn the university, to earn degrees from those universities. They were suitable to pass the NET examination. But just in one interview, which is 15%, 80% people earn with their academic qualification and other accomplishments, but only this 15% you are assessed in your interview and you are striked off saying none found suitable. Now, how do you expect justice? These are some of the very hard-hitting questions that I would, want to bring through social legal platform to the audiences.
Thank you so much,
Yes.
Professor. We will now move on to the last question. The last question of Hindutva politics and less representation of Dalit, Adivasi and Bahujans. So the representation of the Bahujans in universities, other institutions, including judiciary and parliaments, is fairly low, even after the Mandal 1 and Mandal 2. How do you react to the fact that some scholars have also pointed out that social justice has been replaced with strong Hindutva politics?
Tasneem, I feel this is a very interesting question, and this is very relevant to the current times. What I feel that the question of social justice now the Hindutva politics also, and their think tank called RSS also have realized that it's difficult to stop social justice. So let us delay it. It is difficult to deny social justice. Let us delay. And I say justice delayed is justice denied. The Hindutva intellectuals, you must have realized even during 2014 election and particularly in 2015 Bihar election, there were a lot of controversy about what does RSS think of reservation. So if they come to power, will they, do away with even SC/ST reservation? It's not as that simple. I call Hindutva politics very pragmatic today. They're very pragmatic people. And they calculate the gains and losses every day. So if I can refer to some politicians in Uttar Pradesh who are out of cabinet, have brought back to cabinet to set that, caste equation, what we call at social engineering. But what I feel, and this is what, editor of this book on many forms have challenged that why we do not have like, a lot of Sudra intellectuals within RSS organization. Why do not they promote them? Now, I do not quite, agree to him also in that questions, because they definitely can give lip service to this. So now, as you see, because OBC is the largest chunk of the voters, therefore their convenience since 2014, very cunningly projected and campaigned that they are having the first OBC prime minister, which is wrong. Devegowda, Charan Singh, they all were like, from Sudra OBC background who have been the prime ministers earlier. And the current prime minister, for your information, let me tell you, he does not come from, he was not born a Sudra. He was born a Banya. His caste has been brought into a category called OBC, which is an administrative mechanism. Like, I'll give you an instance. Dhobi caste is scheduled caste in many states, but in many states, they are OBCs. So that changes. So OBC is an administrative category which can change, but their social status does not change. Therefore, I blame this theory of M.N. Srinivas, very renowned sociologist. But I think these theories have done more damage to the Sudras and Ati Sudras. Why? Because they started imitating those who were discriminating against them. Look, no black has imitated white in America. They said black is beautiful. So the oppressed do not imitate the oppressor. But in Indian society, you see, the Sudras started imitating the Brahmins or the Kshatriyas. They started wearing the sacred thread, imagining what? That their status will be upgraded. But does it so happen? It never happens. And that is what Dr. Ambedkar said. That he says, until the fifth Varna of untouchables came into being, Sudras in the eyes of Hindus were the lowest of the low. So, what I'm, this sentence is very important. Sudra is not only placed at the bottom of the gradation, but he is subjected to innumerable ignominies and disabilities so as to prevent him from rising above the condition fixed for him by the law. But now poor Sudras never understood that by wearing sacred thread, I do not become a Kshatriya. You keep calling yourself a new Kshatriya. Who considers you a Kshatriya? And why do you want to become a Kshatriya for that matter? Because this whole Brahmanical ideology flows upside down. It is this Brahmanical ideology which has taught Sudras to be, harsh to the Ati Sudras also. And then you have social scientists claiming that there is a fight between the Sudras and Ati Sudras. It is a ladai between the Sudras and Ati Sudras on the field. Why? It is the Sudras who does the maximum atrocities on the Ati Sudras. Now, where does this atrocity comes to a Sudra mind? It is from the same Brahmanical texts. It is from the Manusmriti, which has taught. Then the Sudra thinks, Yare, hamare upar, the graded inequality, what Ambedkar so appropriately defined. Then the Sudra thinks, Are, hamare upar to Kshatriya hai, unke upar Brahmin hai, हमसे नीचे कौन? हमसे नीचे अति शूद्र हैं, तो उन पर अपना गुस्सा उतारो. So therefore, me and the editor of this book many a times, say that the atrocities against the Dalits, against the Ati Sudras is a problem. Is definitely a problem, and it can be dealt with only by educating the Sudras. Because unless the Sudras themselves understand that you are not very high, you are of the equal status. By being a vegetarian and wearing a sacred thread, your status does not change in spirituality of the nation. This is what I had to say in response to the last question.
Thank you, Professor Kumar, on talking on this wide array of topics from representation, from on the idea of nation, nationalities, how we place the identity. And you wonderfully said that no black in America imitated white, oppressed do not imitate the oppressors. And here, this book's Rethinking India series, which has been edited by Professor Akash Singh Rathore. And I'd like to tell the viewers also that it's a part of our advisory board. He had also launched one of our initiative, Constitution Connect. And in the end, I would like to tell the viewers that this is a must-read book in the process of making citizenry, the process where you became the citizen of India. And in the larger constitutional exam, this book is a must read. Professor Kumar, thank you for your time, taking out this 1 hour long time from busy schedule. We know that how academic schedule has been hectic for you. And thank you very much for taking out time. We wish you all the best for the future endeavors. And we also like to read more from you in the coming time. And I have been informed also that this book is might be coming this series into different languages. And that's a good initiative that we all wanted to read it in more languages. Thank you, Professor Kumar, talking to us.